everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. It's Monday, May 8th, and I'm your host, Cara Santa Maria. This week, we're going to be chatting with science writer Shannon Stirone. But before we do that, I want to thank those of you who made Talk Nerdy possible this week. Remember, there's a lot of ways that you can support the show. One of them is by going to my website, carasantamaria.com, and clicking through the PayPal portal to make a one-time donation. And Theodore Frisidas did that this week, and I want to thank you so much. Also, you can click through to the Patreon portal, or you can just visit it at patreon.com/talknerdy. This is a way to support the show on an ongoing basis. Anything from 50 cents to, $50. Whatever you would like to do, you'll be supporting the show per episode. This week's top supporters are Phil T-Bear, Timothy Glover, Jonathan Wright, Christian Jeffrey, David Lacey, Jeffrey Perez, Stuart Ogue, The Honorable Husband, Jafe, Gabriel Felipe Jaramillo Gonzalez, Brian Holden, and Jeffrey Sewell. Thank you guys so much. You make the show possible. Lastly, you can visit my Talk Nerdy store. We've got lots of cool stuff in stock, from t-shirts to we're out of mugs right now, but I have some on order, so they're coming in soon. But from t-shirts to leather goods to just like fun swag. Also the book, Charlie and His Tortoise, signed by myself and by the author, MJ Mouton. So check those things out at my website, carasantamaria.com. Okay, so this week we're chatting with Shannon Stirone. She's a science writer, a freelance science writer living in the Bay Area, and she has written pieces for so many outlets. Let's see, New Republic, The Atlantic, Motherboard, Popular Science, Discover Magazine, Smithsonian Magazine, Astronomy Magazine, National Geographic, and now Space, among others. So without any further ado, here she is, Shannon Stirone. Well, Shannon, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to talk to a freelance science reporter. Is that the best way to word it? Is that what you generally call yourself?
Yeah, I have 3 different versions that I mix in. That's
What are they? What are they?
It depends. Sometimes freelance science writer, or just writer, or science journalist, reporter. It sort of depends on who I'm talking to. But yeah, that works.
Totally. And I find sometimes it depends on the outlet and it depends on the job, right? Because if you're working on certain things, you might call it writing. Other things, you might call it journalism or reporting. But mostly these are all synonyms.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So there's so many things I'm going to pick your brain about today because as somebody who's also a freelancer, I think we can commiserate a little bit about a few things. But also, I think the listeners of the show may be interested and have questions about how can they start writing, if they feel like there's something inside of them that they have to get out, and also just some of the pitfalls and the excitement of working as a freelancer. The other thing that is I'm going to indulge myself, and hopefully the people that are listening to the show care enough to keep listening, is that I have some writing projects I'm working on lately because I'm a freelance science communicator. I don't write much, and when I do write, it's usually scripts. But I have some writing projects, some real writing projects I'm working on lately, and I hate it, and I have no motivation, and I'm so bad at writing, and so I'm going to pick your brain about ways that I can kind of overcome my own self-sabotage. But before we get into all of that, let's talk about what you do and what some of your outlets are. I'm looking here, and the bylines that I've found of yours are Popular Science, The Atlantic, New Republic, let's see, I have something else, Astronomy Magazine. What are some other places that you commonly write for?
I write for Motherboard sometimes, Discover.
Okay. Discover.
Yeah, Now Space. Yeah, there's a few, but my pop sci has definitely been my bread and butter regular for the last couple of years. Yeah.
Gotcha. And so, and I'm finding, and of course I've known this because when I first came across your byline and started reading your work and sharing it and got interested in chatting with you, you are a space junkie for sure.
Yeah, that is a very safe thing to say.
I love it because this is the area of science that I am sort of least, educated on. Sometimes I find myself in situations where I do communicate science the science of space, the science of kind of cosmology or physics or astronomy. And I have to bone up a lot more because my background is definitely not in this area. So what about you? What made you interested in this specifically? Did you study this in school?
Not at all. Not even close.
Love it.
No. My background isn't in art history, actually, and I have no education in space or science. It's something that I've loved since I was a kid. I think I was like 6 or 7 when I think we got a picture back of Jupiter, and my teacher said, "Oh, see that red spot? You can fit 4 Earths in there." And it completely blew my mind. And ever since then, I've been completely obsessed with space.
That's so great. And so being obsessed with space and actually having a legitimate career that like pays the bills are 2 very different things, right? Yeah. So how did you make that transition from saying, this is something I love, and saying, hey, even though it seems like it could be tough, I'm going to try and see if I can make this a real job?
Yeah, that is definitely the hard part. The turning point for me was a few years ago. I'd met a fellow science journalist, Murray Carpenter, who's wonderful. And I'd actually bought this book called Letters to Einstein, which is this little tiny mini book of this curated collection of letters that Einstein had written to children and that they'd written to him. And I'd found this one to this girl, and he'd written to her twice. And that was the moment where I said, what happened to her? Why would he write her twice and not any other child? And so I spent 2 years looking for this woman who I just always wanted to know, did she become a scientist because Einstein wrote to her twice? And it turns out that she did.
That's amazing.
And that was my first byline ever, my first published piece with PopSci. And after that, I said, God, I fell completely in love with looking into this stuff. And I just realized I need to write about space because it's something that sustains my interest every day, even though I talk about it every day and I think about it all the time. It never gets old.
I love that. And so, okay, then I have to ask, this is probably hard because it's like asking what's your favorite child. But when it comes to space, what is maybe one or maybe a group of things that you're most obsessed with? Like what really occupies your brain meat juice the most?
That's a really tough question. I don't know. I love the idea of finding life in the solar system. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a lot of, oh man, that's a really tough question. That's really hard.
Well, okay, maybe we'll put it this way. Let's say that you had early on in life gone the route of studying to be an astronomer or studying to be a physicist or studying to be even a fighter pilot and then becoming an astronaut, whatever, all the different areas outside of science writing where this would have been your world. What do you think you would have chosen to do?
I would have become an astronomer. I mean, nice. I grew up wanting to be Jill Tarter, like many other people that I know. I wanted to be Ellie Arroway from Contact. I wanted to be an astronomer that looked for ET and wanted to answer that big question, are we alone? I think that's the thing for me that's the best, is the fact that when you study these things, even if it's just planetary science or geological activity on some moon, it's constantly putting you in perspective of how small you are, and that's what I love.
Yeah. When I was in college, in undergrad, I was studying psychology, but of course, most universities have science requirements, and sometimes they split their science requirements into sort of life and physical sciences. I ultimately went into biology, but I had to take some physical sciences, and I chose astronomy. And there was a choice. You could do planetary astronomy or you could do stellar astronomy at the most basic level, like the 101 level. You had to choose between the two. And I ended up taking stellar astronomy. I was kind of bummed because it turns out that the labs were less interesting when we're looking through the telescope and we're like, yeah, it's another star that looks just like a star. But and I was like, oh, I should have taken planetary. Are you more interested in the planetary side of things, or is it kind of 50-50 for you?
I think it's more the planetary. I really like the idea that we can physically visit these places nearby and study them. So it's, whenever we have missions, like we've got Juno at Jupiter and we'll have Europa in a few years, it's so cool. I can't wait.
Totally. And I'm looking through a lot of the pieces that you've written. And yes, you focus oftentimes on, planets and their moons, especially things that are, newsworthy, like the Juno mission. And then also a lot of exoplanet talk, Planet 9, of course, which is a new kind of potential discovery. But then some really interesting things. Like there's a piece that you wrote just this past month for The Atlantic about superbugs, like superbugs that could live in outer space. And that I love because it combines, I think, a lot of interest. It kind of goes that astrobiology route, and it combines some sort of biology with physics. What made you want to write about that?
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, because that is one of the more fun stories I've ever written. That was, I'd covered that for Discover in 2015 when the experiment first launched, but I've been bugging David Smith, who's bugging. Yeah,
I had to. Okay,
no pun intended. I was super bugging David Smith, who's the PI for that mission, for a year. Like, where are your results? Hurry up! Tell me when are you publishing? But that is so exciting because it's not just Saffir32, which is this bug that this bacteria that's really resilient in space. There's lots of other ones that are resilient in space, but there's lots of different elements to that are interesting.
Okay, so tell me about it. What is this mission, or what is this study?
Yeah, so the study is the EMIST experiment. So it's exposing microorganisms to the stratosphere. And this team from NASA Ames sent this payload of 40 million bacterial endospores up to the stratosphere for 8 hours. And the idea was, let's see how quickly we can kill these guys. And then if they live, let's try to find out why or how. And so most of them died, which he was expecting to be the case. But the few that lived all had this genetic mutation called a SNP. And so they don't know what the SNPs mean. They don't know if it's relevant to their survival. But the interesting thing that David, who's the PI for that, is it's not only looking at what does this mean for if life can survive in space. So as we're landing missions on Mars or Europa or wherever, we can actually send viable microbes elsewhere in the solar system. So there's sort of iffy questions about that.
Yeah, like, are we contaminating these places we're studying? But also, do we have the potential to pick up microbes that might have lived there?
Yeah, exactly. And the microbes that gave life to us, are they from Earth or, during the impacts in the early days of the solar system? So it's also just how life evolves here. And there's lots of crazy extremophiles that survive in places on Earth that make absolutely no sense at all. And so this is just one that happens to hang in there in space, which is really cool.
I love that, and it reminds me a lot of some of the stories that we're often telling on Skeptic's Guide and sometimes here on Talk Nerdy about tardigrades, because of course we're all obsessed with tardigrades.
Oh, yeah.
Water bears, aka moss piglets. That's my favorite.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, and how they can survive like anything, and they can totally hang in space, and they can be all desiccated and gross and then come right back.
Yeah, tardigrades are so cool. They're amazing. I don't know anyone who isn't fascinated by them. But yeah, they're a good example of like they're called like mini animals.
Animalcules or something like that.
Yeah. But yeah, they've survived space. You can just really try so hard to kill them, and they manage to survive. So that part is so exciting because it makes you think, what else is in the solar system that maybe out there that can survive, and can they evolve? Do they have the potential to evolve? It's so cool.
Absolutely. Like we were just talking on the other podcast I work on, Skeptic's Guide, about the big plumes on Enceladus, and how now that we see that all this like crap is being thrown out into space, there's a much better chance of being able to do sampling visits, right? Like if we're really trying to look for astrobiological signs, it's much harder to go to Europa and like build a big probe and go down under the ocean, like, feet, maybe even miles into this ice, than it would be to try and pick up something that's already being spewed out. But of course, I was asking my fellow co-hosts who know much more about this kind of stuff than I do, like, wouldn't it all be frozen? Like, it's cold out there, right? These are probably like ice cubes at this point, and it's space. Like, things don't survive. And they were like, yeah, it'd probably all be dead, but maybe we could find something. And it's like, hey, maybe it wouldn't all be dead. You never know.
You never know. There's a chance that it might not be, especially for Enceladus, because with the last, the paper that just came out that said that they found this hydrogen in the plumes, which makes us think that there's these hydrothermal vents underneath, underneath the oceans of Enceladus, and those would be warm. And granted, the process of flying from what might be a warm hydrothermal vent up into space would probably kill you. But we would tend to think that about stuff that we find here in our hydrothermal vents and things with no light, and sending something that's, like this, the Saffir 32 from that article is Bacillus pumilus, which lives in the soil.
Okay.
But we sent it to space, a strain of it to space, and it survives when it comes back down. So the thing that I learn more when I report on this stuff is that we just don't know anything. There's so much about life and how it functions and how it survives that we don't know, which is super cool when you think about flying through the plumes of Enceladus. Would they be alive? Would it just be like fossilized evidence of life that's been killed as it gets flung up into space? Or,
would it even be able to fossilize if it was, so I guess, early in its development and there were no hard parts of the body, and would there be rock? I mean, it's so many questions. That's what I love about astrobiology, is like these basic kind of almost philosophical questions of like, would we even know life if we saw it, if it were so different from our own sort of definitions?
Exactly. And there's so many places in the solar system, and even, thinking about exoplanets, different types of stars that could form different kinds of life. But all we know about life is that when we find it, there's water, there's oxygen, it requires, carbon and these sort of really basic elements. That's all we can think of when we look for life elsewhere. But there's still so much we don't know, so we can't really rule anything out, in my opinion.
Oh, I completely agree. So much interesting stuff to constantly cover. I mean, you picked a good sort of niche when you write, or a good beat, I guess that's what we call it in journalism, because there's always something new. And even when there's not something that's brand new, there's so much good meat out there to dig into. Like, I'm looking at your most recent, I hope that this is your most recent piece for PopSci, or I should say Popular Science. How are they about that? Do they call themselves PopSci?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay. I worked at Huffington Post way back in the day, and like, they're really weird about it. It was HuffPost, but not HuffPo. Like, okay, whatever. So I wasn't sure. I didn't want to bastardize Popular Science. Your most recent piece, I think, is called "What Happens to Your Body When You Die in Space?" And should colonists on Mars be allowed to eat each other? I love this shit. I have to say, I'm obsessed with like the weird kind of dark underbelly, grotesque, morbid, the very Mary Roach of it all. You know what I mean?
I
is
like
my
that
favorite.
too.
I love it. Good. So I take it you've read like everything Mary Roach has ever written.
I haven't read everything she's ever written, but I've read, her Packing for Mars and
her space stuff. Yeah,
her space stuff. Yeah. I'm biased.
I get it. It's so good. I'm looking at this, and it's like, it's fascinating because there's history, right? You open it with a conversation about Apollo 11, but then of course we're really trying to get at the meat of like, if we go to Mars anytime soon, it will likely be a one-way trip. It will likely be full of so much risk. People probably will die. I mean, it is kind of part of boldly going where nobody has gone before, is understanding that there's a good chance that something will go wrong at some point. They obviously try to ensure, especially at places like NASA, which are pretty conservative, try to ensure that that won't happen. But we all saw The Martian. We all thought that Mark Watney was dead. Right?
Yep.
And we saw kind of how they dealt with that. So tell me a little bit about what you learned in reporting for this piece.
I think the biggest thing I learned from this piece was that it's very murky waters when we think about taking that next long step in space exploration, especially for Mars, because, NASA is very conservative, and they won't do anything that puts their astronauts at risk. They won't do anything that could expose them to death if they don't have to. And so we were talking about, this journey to Mars, and all we talk about is going to Mars. And Elon's always, we're going to go to Mars, and we're going to do it first, and we're going to go soon. But the tricky thing is, there's a good chance that you could just go and have a one-way trip. And you'd have some problems along the way, possibly. When you got there, you'd have your own set of problems. But as we look into really long-term programs and having a sustainable presence on Mars, there's all sorts of icky issues. And it's the same thing we're going to run into when we explored the Arctic for the first time. Was we have to have resupply missions, and what happens if you get stranded?
Yeah.
And what do you do if one of your teammates dies and your resupply doesn't come and you don't have any food? Is it ethical to consume your crew member if it means survival? And that was my favorite part, I think, about this story, was asking a bioethicist, what are the ethics around cannibalism, even when it comes to our beloved astronauts, and thinking about the romanticism of space exploration. Like, can we eat people? Is that okay?
What did he say?
He said yes.
I figured as much. And I figured that actually that is the ethos of an astronaut as well. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if you asked an astronaut themselves if your body could provide sustenance for your fellow crewmates and potentially get them back alive, would you? And they would say in a heartbeat. Like, if they even had a question about it, I would be pissed at them if I died. I wouldn't want to go to waste. Yeah,
for sure. And I wouldn't either if that was me. Just like, whatever. What are you going to do with your body anyway? But there, we don't like to think about that. But Andy Weir wrote that into The Martian. When they thought that they weren't going to get enough food, they sort of made this, like, they alluded to this pact that they had made around, like, we'll all commit suicide, and this one character will stay alive, and she will, when she runs out of food, she will eat us, and just for the sake of saving Mark and completing this mission. Astronauts are a really special group of people who, in my opinion, I've met a few of them, like, they operate on a different level, the way that they think, the way they've lived their lives. So, I think they would totally sacrifice themselves to save a crew member. But it's there's lots of problems with the Mars mission. And if they die along the way, what do you do with the body? Like, do you store them? How can you store them? And that's what this Promessa thing was really interesting, because all essentially it does is it freeze dries your body.
I love it.
Yeah, and then it shakes you up into a million different tiny little frozen dust pieces, and it just compresses you into this bag. And they haven't made this prototype yet, but this is what the design would do. And then it would just, you'd turn into a little mini suitcase, and they'd shove you somewhere in the spacecraft, and
so that way they can get you home, and they can actually have a proper funeral once you're home. It's almost like, I don't know, I feel like I'm gonna coin this for them right now. They should call it cold cremation. Just saying.
Cold cremation. I like that.
Cold cremation. I think it would catch on. And it makes sense. Although 50 pounds is still a lot of payload, but I guess it's 150 pounds less than a 200-pound astronaut.
Yeah, exactly. And then if you're thinking, if you're really going on that long of a journey to Mars, you're going to have this huge space station type thing that you're traveling in. Like, Andy Weir did a really good job sort of capturing what that system would look like someday when it happens, with artificial gravity and, these huge areas. So, 50-pound suitcase bag thing, put it somewhere. But that's
it up in a corner.
Yeah, but we have to think about that, because especially if Elon does what he wants to do and just really sends people, or if Mars One ever had their dream come true and really sent their one-way trip, they would be confronted with those problems, no doubt.
Oh, absolutely. And I feel like, I've talked about this a little bit in the past on the podcast, but it's something that I've been obsessing over a lot lately. If you were to come into my office and look at all the books on my shelves, I have like whole shelves dedicated to books about death and about how kind of Americans interact with death, and maybe Westerners as a whole, but I can more just speak to American culture, and how we're super avoidant. And the truth is, like, we can't just pretend this isn't an issue. Like, we need real contingencies. We can't just be like, I don't want to think about that happening, so I'm not going to come up with what we should do about it.
Exactly. And I love that you said that, because when I tried really hard to get NASA on the record telling me, what is your contingency plan? What happens right now if one of the astronauts on the space station died right now?
Yeah, because that could totally happen. Somebody could have a heart attack and they couldn't get home in time.
Yeah, and it's much easier when you're in low Earth orbit, and we can just send them back on the Soyuz, or we'll wait until the resupply comes back, and they had all these different backup plans. But as soon as you're out past low Earth orbit, what are your plans? And they said, we work on a case to case basis. We have contingency protocols, but they didn't want to give me a specific answer, and I shouldn't have expected them to, but I really wanted one because we can't avoid that. People will die as long as we keep pushing the boundaries in space with humans. People will die. It's
just part of the risk that if we want to get to Mars, that we just have to be willing to accept, because it's just crazy dangerous.
Yeah, it's really dangerous. And that was something that was interesting talking to people when I was reporting on this. There was sort of that conversation around, what does the public want? NASA is worried about, of course, naturally, PR around, we don't want the public to think about our astronauts dying. We want them to think about being successful and sort of carrying out these scientific missions. And of course, no one wants to think about these heroes dying at all.
Yeah.
But it's the elephant in the room. And it's the risk that they all take anytime they go out on a spacewalk. It's a risk they take.
Absolutely. Death is immediate if you are, going on a spacewalk. Like, basically just everything is in place to keep them from dying. Naturally, they should die when they leave the ISS.
It's a really stupid thing to do, to just put on a suit and go outside of a spacecraft and float around with a cable and use power tools. That's ridiculous.
No, it's amazing. But you're right. I think that's another thing that The Martian, both the book, which obviously has way more detail than the film was able to pull off, but even the film adaptation of the book did a really good job of highlighting that kind of push-pull between reality and the publicity around reality that NASA is faced with doing to keep their funding and to keep people sort of excited and also trusting of the space program.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right with the trust issue. And see, but I talk to people all the time, and because when people find out that you write about space, they, when are we going to Mars? I get that question a few times a week from people. When are we going to Mars? And I burst their bubble a little bit and say, I don't know. It's going to be a really long time. I'm sorry if you're 60 years old. It's probably not going to happen for you. You're not going to get to see that. But I think the public, when I was talking to, especially the bioethicists, but I think the public is willing to forego a lot of that risk to see it happen. Mm-hmm. I think that consensus is we just want to go. We just want to do more things and carry the risk, and we don't really care about your PR. It's usually the people higher up that are concerned we'll lose funding if this person dies. But when you look at Apollo, when they first started sending people on those missions and doing those preliminary missions, they didn't know how soft the Martian soil was, or the lunar surface was.
Yeah.
They didn't know how far these machines would sink in, or would they fall all the way through. But they went anyway.
Yeah, they were kind of only almost ready to go.
Yeah.
They're pretty ready to go, but of course there was a space race happening. So they've really pushed themselves and there was uncharted territory for sure.
Exactly. And now you have everyone in Congress, hearkening back to, if we could just have another Apollo moment, if we could get back to that time where we just took these risks and really were bold and we always have that option, but those risks are there, and they always will be.
Yeah. It's always it's easy to say when you actually come out of it successful that it was a great idea, but
exactly.
Hindsight's always 20/20 when we actually have a huge tragedy, and that's a really legitimate risk. And I think it's cool that you focus so much writing about that. All right, let's get back to the show. It's not just always about space. When you write about space, and this is something I'd love to explore with you as a professional writer. When you write about things that, I don't want to use the word esoteric because I don't think space is esoteric. I think it's something that really connects with a lot of people. But as we all know, when it comes to science communication, the easiest way to connect with an audience and to talk about science is to talk about people, right? Like
Yeah.
we connect with stories about our own. We want to hear human stories. And I see that a recent piece that you wrote in PopSci was The Man Who Fixed Hubble about Mike Massimo. And of course that's a very cool human story. But sometimes you're tasked with writing about things where it's a little harder to draw that parallel. But do you always sort of try to do it?
I try if I can. Yeah, even if that's connecting with like the PI on the mission or project scientist or someone that can just give you a quote that says, "This was so exciting," and I've waited 10 years to see us land on this comet, or whatever it is. But yeah, people don't care about robots mostly.
Yeah, right. It's hard to emotionally connect with a robot.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing when you're cute, like curiosity and opportunity and spirit, and you've got these these very like, we personify them and anthropomorphize them and make them into these adorable little things, which they kind of are. I hate to say it, but they are.
It's kind of true. There's like a Wall-E-ism to them for sure.
Yeah, and that they're being remotely operated and they're just out there by themselves, and it's so sad. But generally, like when you talk about like Cassini, which is a really good example, because Cassini's coming to an end, and you're seeing all these articles out about what the mission's given us, but people, just the general public, see a spacecraft, they see just aluminum and, antennas and these weird little components. The only thing that they relate to is how those pictures make them feel. But it's really hard to get people connected to robotic exploration. And that is why it's tough writing about that stuff sometimes, because you're only tapping into people that maybe care about the science or care about the photos or something else. But it's tough. You always want a human element. That's the best part.
Yeah, and that's why I think oftentimes we even see a lot of personification. Obviously, Curiosity had its own Twitter account, and that was like a really good example. But even with things like Cassini, you might see headlines about like the last bow or plunging to a fiery death, like all these things that like robots don't actually die. But if we talk about them that way, it really does give us more of an emotional connection to them.
Yeah, and I think that's the only way that it works, because for those of us that are already connected and invested in those missions, and for whatever reason, like the science is really rewarding, or those pictures are so beautiful, and what we've learned from it. But yeah, it's anthropomorphizing the robotic explorers who are there in our stead. We can't be there, so they're there for us.
Yeah.
That's what we have to tap into that. And it's actually really powerful, because you see people on Twitter and, hear in the news, like, oh, it's so sad, they're going to kill this robot.
And
it's
so funny.
And in their head, maybe they're thinking Wall-E, maybe they are thinking Wall-E, or what's another cute robot?
All I can think of is Eva from Wall-E.
Who's also cute.
Who's also, yeah.
Wall-E's so adorable. But when you think about when you think about Wall-E, if you're going to throw Wall-E into Cassini or into Saturn and have it, vaporize and completely explode and blow, just burn up and become completely destroyed and become a part of the planet, all of a sudden you go, oh no.
Yeah.
That's really sad. That sucks. I don't want the robot to die.
Yeah.
We have to use that tool. And NASA, that's one thing that NASA, especially JPL, they've tapped into that. Like, let's really sort of make these robots connecting, to humans, and understand that there's actual people on a daily basis who have their hands on this mission and who are sending the commands. And, those are the people that are just separated by millions and millions and millions of miles, but that's them in a spacecraft, like in robot form.
Yeah, no, it's true. That really is, that's their, that's the outcome of their actual physical work and like what their hands did and their minds did. And we don't often think about that. That's absolutely true. So, okay. So we've talked a bit about some of the things that you've written lately and sort of your interest area and how you found it. But I want to talk a little bit about your process, if that's okay.
Of course.
So you're a freelancer, which means that basically nothing is guaranteed and nothing about your life is cushy. You're constantly having to work to work.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So the only way that you're going to get a story published by one of these big outlets who you have great relationships with because you've busted your ass all this time is that you pitch them a really interesting idea and they think, okay, that's interesting enough and I trust you enough to deliver it that it's worthwhile for me to hire you for that story.
Yeah, it's a brutal world to live in. Sometimes I've been lucky and I've gotten assignments, and that is a very foreign concept and feeling to not have to think of an idea or pitch it and have them come to you and say, do you want to write about this? And you go, yeah. But
it comes with its own, difficulties too, because when you're on assignment, maybe this is something that is sort of out of left field for you and you're coming at it like, oh crap, I don't even know how to approach this.
Yes, that has happened many times, especially for Astronomy magazine, which I love, and my editor there is fantastic. But some of those topics are very technical and difficult, and I have no background, so I'm banging my head against the desk trying to understand these things. But yeah, as a freelancer, you are constantly hustling, constantly looking for stories that other freelancers haven't found yet, or you're trying to get to something before someone else does and get it to the right outlet, and you're constantly getting rejected. It's a strange life.
Yeah. And trying to figure out, like, how can I come at this differently than everybody else has? Mm-hmm. Because that is something that happens, right? If news doesn't break in science the way it breaks in politics, for example. There's not we couldn't fill a 24-hour news cycle with science news, probably simply because we know when something big is going to happen. Everything's embargoed. We know about it before it even, gets out. Science moves a little more slowly. We've got a different pace. And so by the time something that's newsworthy hits, every outlet is probably already writing about it.
Yeah. And so as a freelancer, there are some freelancers that cover news on a pretty regular basis, but I never pitch news because the staff of every publication has someone who's covering that special embargoed news, or, that's their bread and butter. So they've got it covered. The hard part is finding the things that aren't the news, but are also interesting. That's worthy of them paying you and giving you the time and the space.
Absolutely. And so let's say that you find something like that. You're reading because you're really interested in this topic and you're watching documentaries and talking to people that you find interesting, and you have a spark and you say, oh my God, this would be so great to write about. I'm going to pitch it. And then somebody goes, oh my God, I think that would be great to publish. We're going to pay you to do it. Yes. Okay. The hard part's done. But no, the hard part's not done because now you have to actually write it.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to hear a little bit about your process, both selfishly because I want to get better at writing, but also because I think sometimes it's fun for, all of us listening to the show right now to kind of learn how the sausage is made. Because a lot of people imagine monkeys on typewriter sitting in a big newsroom, but that's not how most news is done anymore. There are newsrooms still, and there are staff reporters still at certain publications who actually have a desk that they go to every day. But so much of what you read online is written by freelancers. Yeah,
and it's done usually alone in a room by yourself and your computer with many emails back and forth and phone calls. But okay, so the hard part's done. Pitch has been accepted. Work has been commissioned. Now it's usually by the time I've pitched a story, I know this is true for most freelancers, but by the time you've pitched a story, you've done maybe 30% of the reporting, maybe 40%, so you know enough about it, but you have to finish that. So,
and when we say reporting, I feel like sometimes maybe people don't know what that means, but that's actually the calling people up, asking them questions, taking notes, right? That's sort of the background. Is this something that's even worth pursuing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's calling people, scheduling maybe just one or two small interviews, or just emailing back and forth, reading a paper maybe. Just so you know, the meat that you have there, something that's worth writing about in the first place. But yeah, once your pitch is accepted, then you sort of pick up where that left off, and so you'll schedule a longer interview and email more people and get a couple of sources, make sure that you're getting the entire picture, and that process, depending on how fast you have to write it, could be in a day or a week or a couple of weeks if it's a feature.
Yeah, and maybe sometimes you have to travel to do it, depending on what the story is.
Yeah. If you're lucky, if it's something that's really cool, you get to travel. And
yeah, but that's rare, right?
That's rare.
That means they have to pay you enough to have, a living wage and get a paycheck, and also they have to pay for all of that, which most news outlets are like, no.
Yeah, exactly. They won't if they don't have to, but if it's really cool, they will, which is super fun. But yeah, so then you're just, the reporting is the fun part, because that's when you get to talk to the scientists and engineers and ask them, what are you most excited about? And that's the fun part. But then the writing is not.
Okay, so I'm starting to realize there's been a handful of people that I've talked to when I'm like, I hate writing. I'm not good at it. I can't get motivated. I just get the worst writer's block. And there's been a very small percentage of people who are like, oh, that's weird because I love it. But most people I talk to are like, yeah, welcome to writing.
Most people I know of, especially my freelancer friends, hate it.
And so how do you feel about it?
I will say that I hate it when nothing is coming to mind and I'm very uninspired. But when you find that magic moment where all of a sudden it sort of all comes into your head, and that's when the writing is fun. But yeah, the actual process of it, the sitting and just really banging your head against the desk to try to make something coherent that other people can understand is actually really difficult.
One thing that I find myself doing, which I know is just a bad habit, is instead of just barfing out everything that's on my mind and then going back and finessing it later, I find myself obsessively finessing as I write. And so I'll get through one paragraph and then I'll go back up and reread everything I've written. And, oh, no, I don't like how that word is, I've said it twice in the same sentence. And so I need to fix that now. Like, how do you get past... because we know perfection is the enemy of the good. How do you get past that and just go, I don't care if it's terrible in my first pass. I just need to get the content on the paper.
So I do what you just did. So I always start that way, because you want your story to start off beautiful and capture the attention and imagination of your readers. But that I have found that just doesn't work. And I will still do it every time. Every single time I'll sit and I'll, beat myself up over that word, and I need a different word, or no, a different quote. But the best thing you can do is, for me, to be completely honest, I will wait until I'm so mentally exhausted of hearing myself be frustrated over a piece that I'll just sit and just write everything that I think about it, even if it makes no sense. You just get it all down, and you'd be surprised. Yeah, you'd be surprised how much of the final piece is in that sort of like word vomit.
I love it. So basically, start obsessively until you get obsession drainage, and then get it all out there, and then go back to the obsessive voice at the end when you're basically being your own editor.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are writers out there who are really they've managed to work the system and are experienced and are brilliant, who can sit down and just, get something beautiful right off the bat. But mostly what you find is that that story it's in your head, what you've reported on, you've just talked to people, to just sit down, write what you think are notes.
Yeah.
You think you're just taking notes, like, oh, he said this and then she did this, and before you know it, there's an arc in there, there's a narrative in there. You have to take the time to sort of pick it out as you go through and realize, oh, that's not a note, that's an actual paragraph. Cool. So let me put that with that really obsessive thing I did earlier, and then it comes together eventually.
Yeah, and you've been thinking about it the whole time, like this starts to kind of, I guess, overwhelm your mind in a way, and it's what you're thinking about as you're trying to fall asleep at night.
Yeah, and the news pieces, like when you have to write news and you're doing something quick, you don't really have that that luxury of sort of overthinking it. That's when the panic kicks in, and the adrenaline, and you just get it done, and it's there, and then you can finesse it after you panic and get it done. But when you're writing a feature or something that you want to be really special, you can just there's a couple iterations of things that you write down, and then you might scrap it, then you write it down again. That's just me.
But no, that makes sense. It's like when people ask me, because I'm about to go back to school because I'm a total glutton for punishment. And they're like, oh my God, there's going to be so much writing and you hate writing. It's like, yeah, but that's different. Like academic writing is so formulaic. It doesn't bother me as much because you're not supposed to be poetic. You know, like it's not prose, but prose like cripples me. I freeze and it's so frustrating.
It is really frustrating. And, reading a lot helps with that, but it really depends on your outlet because not every outlet wants that either. They just sometimes they just want like, give me the science, give me the gist, what happened, what's cool, why is anybody going to care, end scene.
Yeah.
And that's it. But when you get to write something that's got more prose in it and you can tell a story, that is where you naturally will start to beat yourself up and go, oh my God, like how can I make this beautiful? How can anybody, feel the way I feel about this beautiful subject? And that's when you will completely freeze. That's when I freeze.
And it's funny, right? Because then you find yourself having the most sort of negative experience as you're doing it, like stressing and whatever. But then it's the stuff that you're most proud of having done.
It's really true. And then especially as a writer, I don't know any writer who doesn't think that they suck.
Yeah. That's and I think that's just kind of the case across the board. Everyone has imposter syndrome.
Yeah, everybody. Even the most amazing writers that you could think of, just they have their moments where they go, why on earth is anybody paying me to write this? And you get that every time you sit down to write. And you just have to eventually tell that voice to just shut up and move on because you just have to get the job done and you like it. But it's a really difficult process. But the best thing I have learned is to find a way to quiet yourself and just sit and write what you think are the notes. You think they're just your thoughts, but the story is there.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And for anybody listening who I think struggles with the same things that I struggle with as a non-writer, take, I guess, solace in the fact that even professional writers struggle with it. And if you're having that same experience, you are not alone.
No, you are not.
And sometimes just knowing that can be enough to help you get over your hump. Like, oh, I'm not insane. I'm not living in this like bubble of insanity. Everybody would have the same experience if they were in my shoes.
Yeah, exactly. And especially as freelance writers, you tend to be really isolated because we're not in buildings with other writers. And so we can tend to feel very alone. So I definitely recommend reaching out to other freelancers and you'd be surprised that they all feel the same thing. They struggle with the same issues.
Yeah, and sometimes people actually like to do things like co-write. I have a lot of science writer friends, and it is not uncommon if we're talking, they're like, oh, I'm going to be at this coffee shop if you want to join me. Now, I think another reason why writing is hard for me is that I have terrible writing hygiene in that I will like wear my pajamas and I will write in bed and do all the things you're not supposed to do. And I have a really hard time focusing in a coffee shop, for example. It's just way too much stimulation for me. So what about you? Do you have the kind of job where nobody's policing you? Like you literally never have to put on pants. Do you put on pants? Do you have some sort of ritual that you go through? Or are you like, no, I'm just not going to wear pants?
Yeah, that's really funny. I do have that option. I could be pantsless all the time. And nobody would know.
Nope.
But I would get so sleepy that I'm not someone that can work in my pajamas in bed. I would just be asleep all the time. I wouldn't do anything.
Yeah, that's what I do. That's the problem. I spend half the time unconscious, and then I'm like, why didn't I write more?
Yeah, that actually sounds really good. No, but I do I do have a ritual. I have to get up, I have to put actual clothes on, and I go to the coffee shop almost every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if it's too quiet, then I get lost in thinking about like I should clean my house or I should go grocery shopping or do something else. But if I'm in a public place and there's a little bit of sort of that white noise hum, I can zone out and just write like that. Airplanes are the best, though. For me, airplanes, I get my best work done on airplanes.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a good idea because there's kind of nothing else to do.
Yeah, it forces you to just sit there and do your work.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, the pajamas are, I could wear pajamas to the coffee shop. That's a good combination.
That's true. Well, now that athleisure is all the rage, I have to say, like, thank goodness for the athleisure trend because I can basically wear sort of appropriate for public consumption pajamas. Like that's my new MO every day.
I think I need to hop on that trend. I think I'm behind. I'm still in the jeans and t-shirts, like junky writer clothes.
Oh God, no! You gotta pull the leggings and the big oversized sweatshirt. It's the best. It's the best. Oh, I love it. Okay, so I feel like I've learned a lot of really good tips. I'm not sure how well I'll be able to implement them, but I will try. I swear I will try. I gotta ask, what is your most exciting kind of story that you've been able to tell recently?
I think recently it's got to be the Atlantic piece. That one, I was waiting a year, almost over a year for him to tell me those results. So I was especially excited about the results from that mission. But yeah, I think the EMIS experiment and the SAFR 32, because I think the next few years, as we test those bugs more and more, it'll inform what we think about in terms of astrobiology, and it'll inform, when we go to Mars for the 2020 rover and when we plan human missions, it'll help us understand more about like what kind of life could we find, like how resilient is it? That's just super cool. So I think that one's got to take the cake for me right now. I've got some stuff in the works that I can't say, but that'll top it'll top that story.
Speaking of stuff in the works, like how at any given time, how many pieces are you usually working on?
Ooh, for me personally, I could have anywhere between 5 pitches out waiting to hear back from editors and working on, I'm working on 2 print stories right now and 3 pieces for the web, sort of all different timing. But I would say on average, I'm maybe 4.
Okay.
3 or 4 that are sort of spread out. And then pitching, which is in itself, it's a whole other thing.
Yeah. So it's really kind of like every stage you're juggling it. Like you've got all these balls in the air. So you're working on a few stories, but one of them has a deadline looming. So you're kind of focusing on that more. But you're also trying to make sure that by the time you finish these stories, you actually have more work in the pipeline.
Exactly. It's a huge balancing act between wanting to, you have this sort of the stuff finishing up in the editing phase or it's being published soon, and you're writing a couple of pieces, and then you're pitching as much as you possibly can so that there's a constant overlap. And that's doesn't always work out that way. Like I've had gaps where I've had 2 months where I'm freaking out because, I'm waiting for pitches and this other thing's ended and I don't have anything to do. But that's just sort of the nature of it. But that's the goal. Yeah. You always want stuff in the pipeline that's coming through.
Yeah. And you've been able to kind of support yourself doing this, haven't you? Like this is a legitimate career path if you're willing to put the work in. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't pay very well, and I'm sure that doesn't surprise anybody that being a freelance writer or a writer of any kind doesn't pay very well, especially a science writer. But yeah, if you work really hard and you're getting paid enough from your publishers and you get enough stuff out there, then you definitely can support yourself. Yeah, I'm lucky that I'm married, so I'm not just doing this by myself. Sure. Yeah, because sometimes this kind of work, being a freelancer, really does require that you have a support system, whether it's a partner or a group of friends who kind of can commiserate, just individuals who understand what it's like, because it's totally different than having an office job. You don't have a 401k. You have to, I have a SEP IRA, right? A self-employment pension plan. You have to do, and you have to pay your quarterlies, and you have to do all of these things that most people who just have a 9-to-5 don't think about. The tax code is not set up in a way that benefits freelancers. It really actually kind of hurts us. And so there's all these, it's not just about the struggles of working by yourself in a vacuum. It's also the struggles of knowing how to be an entrepreneur. Yeah, and that is really difficult. And you're right, the system is not set up to help us at all. The system is, especially in California, as you know, the self-employment tax is really bad. It's really high. And it has to be something that you really love and you work really hard to do, because it's not set up for you to feel comfortable at all. So no, not at all. It's really hard. It is. It's really tough. But the more that sort of you talk to other people who are doing it, the more that you see that it's doable, and that you can kind of help support each other for sure. So wait, I have to ask, but I feel like you said that there were certain things you're not allowed to talk about, and this might be one of them. So just stop me. But have you thought about, or are you excited to, or is there a book in the pipeline?
So there's no book in the pipeline. But
is it a goal of yours?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
cool.
That's sort of my, like, growing up, that once I write a book, I can just die, because I've I've always wanted to write a book, and it's definitely something I have plans to do, and something that I'm constantly keeping my ear to the ground for ideas, for stories, for people. Anytime I meet someone interesting, I mark down their name and think about, like, what's their story, what's their deal, and what are they doing, and I'm always thinking about it. But yeah, someday for sure, no doubt.
Absolutely. I love that. And yeah, you obviously can't do it too soon, because I don't want you to die yet.
Well, hopefully, maybe it'll pay me enough money that I can write another one, and then I can just prolong the inevitable after publication.
Yes. No, I love that. All right. Well, this has been so much fun talking to you, Shannon. Before we go, I would love to kind of close by asking you the same two questions that I ask everybody who joins me on the podcast. And they're sort of big picture questions, but since you write all the time about space, I think big picture questions are sort of in your back pocket anyway. So you ready to go on those?
I'm ready.
All right. So the first one is sort of the bummer side of the equation, and that is when you think about the future, in whatever context kind of is relevant to you right now, whether it's your own personal future, the future of your family, or your community, or even the world, or for you, we could go beyond the world, the universe as a whole. Number one, what is the thing that most concerns you, keeps you up at night, worries you? And then to end on a positive note, on the flip side of that, what are you the most kind of excited and hopeful and optimistic about?
Oh, wow. So the first question, if I'm being perfectly frank, it is the thing that keeps me up at night and most worries me is the state of the world right now, is our country, our political turmoil, and sort of seeing us, it appears as though we're moving backwards, and that concerns me. That really bothers me, because it makes me think about, raising kids in a world where we're still struggling with basic human rights. That really bothers me. That's the very short, non-diatribal answer to the state of the world, but definitely that. The latter, I think the thing that I'm most hopeful about, or I'm most excited about, is in response to the first, seeing how much we all still have in common. And I think a lot of that I see, especially because I'm just ingrained in it, is the science community, sort of seeing everyone come together and uphold certain values and wanting to see the world be what we know it could be. Mm-hmm. That makes me feel really hopeful for our future and sort of humanity in general. So it's sort of, they're two things that oppose each other, but they're, the opposite sides of the same coin.
Absolutely. And so I've got to ask, right, we're recording this on Tuesday, April 25th, but of course it's probably not going to air for a couple of weeks. This past weekend was the march, and I was lucky enough to co-host the big rally before the big march in D.C., and it was
I saw that, yeah.
Incredible. So many people came out in the pouring down rain, and it was just a real testament to how important science is to scientists and non-scientists alike. You're in San Francisco, right? That's where you're based?
Yes.
Did you get to go, or did you get to see some of the coverage of the cool stuff that was happening up in the Bay Area?
I did, yeah. So I was actually at Comic-Con for a workshop on Saturday. So I did get to go to it was really fun, yeah. So I was able to go to the San Jose March, which was actually quite large. Phil Play was there, and Mayim Bialik, and there were a few, really great.
I saw that, and what's her last name? Rachel. I just know her as Rachel does stuff. Rachel Bloom from Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, right? She was there too.
Yeah.
I think.
I'm so bummed
I saw
I
Phil
missed her.
Tweeting about it.
I'm so bummed I missed her. Yeah, she was there. She was there with Phil.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I got to see some of the march. I took pictures of a bunch of signs, but that was so awesome seeing. There were, babies that were in science-themed onesies, and I saw, these women who were like in their 90s who could barely walk trying to hold up signs. You see all these different generations of people out there who realize like what the fact that we're even having to stand outside with signs and march about science is ridiculous.
Yep.
But it's completely ridiculous, and all the things we're having to worry about. But that made me feel really good to see everyone so passionate and, defending facts and saying, like, this is something that's real, this is something we value. Like, we're actually alive right now because of just basic scientific research and vaccines, and let's stand up together. That was fantastic to see. I can't imagine what the DC March was like for you.
It was insane. It was absolutely insane. Unfortunately, it was pouring down rain, so it made it difficult to like be able to interact with people in the way that I would have liked to. Since I had to be on stage a lot, I couldn't just go out into the crowd and come back. But afterward, it was really fun because we got to just leave straight from the stage right into the march and be with all the people that were there the whole time. But of course, it was amazing because it was like, Bill Nye was there and like all the founders of the Earth Day Network and Michael Mann, the climate scientists and a lot of these like incredibly important people, in addition to just literally like tens of that. I don't think there's a final count out yet, so I don't want to overblow it, but I do know that they had a permit on that part of the mall for 75,000 people, and there was a line going blocks away because it was always at capacity. So they had to let people in only after other people left. And I'm assuming the march was, that much bigger because that was just for the rally before the march. So it was just crazy. It was just crazy. It was a real honor to be involved. And again, just restored so much of my faith in humanity, being there literally in front of the White House, the juxtaposition of that, and seeing all of these incredible people in the pouring rain with their kids, with their, like you said, their grandparents, having like these really funny and kind of profound protest signs and marching for what we all believe in. So it was great. Well, Shannon, this was so much fun. Can I ask you before we go, let everybody know where you're most active in social media and kind of where they can find your work?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm way too active on Twitter, so you can definitely find me on Twitter on a daily basis when I'm procrastinating from writing. That is how you know I should be working, when I'm on Twitter too much.
I love it.
You can find me on Twitter, and I share my work on Twitter as well, but you can go to my website, and I'll post my bylines there too.
Cool. Yeah, and that's just shannonstirone.com, right?
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep.
All right. Well, Shannon, this was such a blast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Of course. And everybody listening, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.